बात को पूरी तरह अगर आप नजरअंदाज करेंगे तो नुकसान आपका ये है। अब ये नतुल से कितने साल पहले इतनी दूर आकर
Then I got this one, which happens to be like a sequel to Motorcycle Diaries.
Hello, everyone, and good evening, and welcome to Serendipity Arts Virtual, a web-based festival presented by Magma HDI, Truth Must Be Told, and co-presented by Global Assure. Thank you for joining us for Cyber Theater, The Making of the Last Poet. Amitesh Grover's The Last Poet is a multi-layered art form with theater, film, sound art, creative coding, digital scenography, and live performance. Today, the cast and crew of The Last Poet will be in conversation to open ideas and questions around the emerging genre of cyber theater. They will share the different phases of development of the project, the challenges they faced in bringing together the contemporary practices of performance and technology, and the exciting discoveries they made along the way. Before we begin, a few points for our audience. You can find details regarding the panel and the bios of our panelists in the chat box. The conversation will be followed by a question and answer session. In case you have any questions during the session, please mention them in the Q&A box below. The panel will be addressing them during the course of the conversation. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, a theater practitioner and performance studies scholar, Professor Gargi Bharadwaj. Handing it over to you, Gargi.
Thank you, Purna. Thanks a lot. And welcome all of you who've joined us this afternoon in this conversation that's going to unpack some of the ideas around the making of the show, The Last Poet, but also to zoom out from there and think about the broad trajectories that theater and performance may be taking at this time. I'm very happy to be here with friends and acquaintances and colleagues. I'd like to quickly introduce the panelists and the team members of The Last Poet here before we begin the conversation. We are joined by the writer of the piece, Sarah Miriam. I wonder if Sarah's here already. And if not, I'm told she's going to join us soon. We also have with us the wonderfully talented performers, many of whom do not need any introduction at all. Atul Kumar, Ashwat Bhatt, Bhagyashri Tarke, Pallav Singh, and Deepti Mahadev. Ambika Joshi from Ajaib Ghar, who is the user interface designer for the show. Sound artists Suvani Suri and Abhishek Mathur. And Ed Jacob, who did the film for the show. The technical heads, Praveen Sinha and Gagandeep Singh. Assistant director, Pankuri Zahir. And Amitesh Grover, who has conceptualized and directed The Last Poet. Thank you, all of you, for joining me and all of us in this discussion this afternoon. May I request all of you who have joined us in this conversation today as audiences, we will be taking questions and talking to the panelists. If you have any thoughts, any comments, questions, please do put them in the chat window and I will make sure to return to them as and when I can. I have a few questions that I'd like to begin with and weave them into a conversation with the panelists. So what we are interested in doing is to hear from the team, of course, about how the performance came to be, but also, like I said, to zoom out from the show every now and then, from the particular to the broader questions of newer and emerging forms of theater and performance. And really to think about the current moment and what that might mean for the theater. The context, of course, as we all know and have been suffering, is the global pandemic, but also the variegated forms of social disintegration, really, that are unfolding in the present. An increasingly repressive police state, a deafening and partisan television news media, and the brutal forces of free market economy that we are seeing unfold. So what we want to do today is to ponder together if really a new form, a new aesthetic may be developing in the theater, what its modalities might be, what really is the work of performance in this immediate context, and how it addresses and interpellates its audiences. I'd like to begin with Amitesh Grover, the director of the show. For many present here today, I believe Amitesh does not need an introduction. He's a performance-based artist and curator in New Delhi. His works move across theater, visual art, film, photography, and installation, and have been shown internationally in theaters, galleries, public spaces, and on the internet. He's assistant professor at the NSD and teaches interactive art and performance at several universities in India and abroad. Hello, Amitesh again, and welcome, and thanks for initiating this.
Thank you, Gayatri. Lovely to be in conversation with you.
Yeah, I know, it's lovely. It's been a while since we did that, and I'm glad that it's happening like this. Um, so, Amitesh, why don't you begin talking a little bit about the show to us, just introducing the show, so that then we might pick up some things from there and begin a conversation. So, just quickly, if you can tell us a little bit about the show, how did you think of it at this moment? What went into pulling all these quite diverse people together?
Yeah, before I start talking about the last point, I just want to sort of send out a thank you to Serendipity for having given us this platform to talk about the work, for having supported us throughout the process. It is we are in exceptional times, and this cannot be said enough, I think. And these exceptional times, I think, also require exceptional efforts and adaptations and questions. I think, especially from artists. And I think what this entire festival is doing is a step in that direction. Months ago, when the lockdown hit India and, of course, the rest of the world, um, I think all of us were quite unprepared. And in a situation like ours, where there is a lot of precarity in how art is practiced and how artists survive, the shutting down of theaters and the shutting down of public assembly, which was, I remember, one of the first things that actually got shut down in the lockdown. Hit the performing art sector very badly. Um, and all of us were thinking about, and many of us were also engaged in supporting each other and in relief work as well. But I think I started to think about a few months into the lockdown, I started to think about how a special kind of an unprecedented kind of absence had hit us. And all of us were locked up in our rooms. Those of us who were privileged were locked up in our rooms. Those of us who were not that privileged were stranded and were walking to our homes. And while all of this was taking place, I think art practice for me was changing. It was, what does it mean to produce and create art in these times? This question began to really sort of nag me and disturb me. But I mean, is it even possible to create art in these times? I mean, and if we were to create art, then what would that art be about? What would it address? And I think while thinking about this, what I also started to notice as an artist was that not just the fact that artists uh, were suddenly out of work and didn't know what to do, but also the fact that I think all around the world, I was seeing how authoritarian regimes were um, clamping down on freedom of expression, and of how um, artists were being picked up and investigated. Um, and their work was being banned and taken out of circulation. Um, and I think this is what this kind of a double layer of invisibility. The fact that as an artist, I could not make work because public assembly was banned, but also that as an artist, I couldn't say anything because there's a perpetual threat um, to freedom of expression, is something that started to, I think, germinate a different kind of sort of, a shift in my art practice. So I started to research about poets who have been threatened um, in the so-called sort of democratic modern world that we live in. Um, you know, I found out that there is a very dark history of poets who've been threatened, incarcerated, who've been living in exile, and uh, who've also sort of felt hopeless and lost themselves to the peculiarly sort of undemocratic and intolerant societies that we live in. And that was the starting point for this project. Um, to think of this work in digital terms is to actually also play with the ideas of presence and absence, where all of us are gathered on Zoom right now. We are in one sense present, but in another sense absent as well from each other's spaces. And so this kind of duality that the digital space has, for me, then became the anchor within which I wanted to then sort of explore these ideas of absence, of disappearance. And it's at that time that I, started this project.
I was just thinking about, Amitesh, a lot has been said in the last few months, many months now that we've been in this, about the kind of severe limitations that the digital medium poses. And of course, it's always in relation to what was and what we think will also be again when we go back to, and always one is wondering whether that is ever going to happen. um, we're constantly thinking in terms of a new normal, and I mean, it's anybody's guess what a new normal may be in the theater, right? It's all so fuzzy and unclear at the moment. So a lot has been said about this, and all of us feel that sense of loss in many, many ways. And this loss is also, like you said at the beginning, quite real, because there are, within the art community, there have been many who have, for whom it has also meant, the absence of livelihood and work. Um, but if we were to kind of think a little bit, because artists are, like yourself, are beginning to make work. One of the ways of responding to the present is to also be performing. Um, what do you think could be some of the ways in which the present context, the moment, the limitations of the digital could be used, or is being used in your own experience of making of this show, um, in a productive way? Clearly, there is something that has come your way that has been used to create something new. Um, and so, would you like to throw some, reflect a little bit on that, and by way of doing that, also, like I said, just to if you could introduce the show a little bit, to tell us a little bit more about what are the various themes, what are the various kind of areas that you're drawing from for the show. So those are two sets of questions, Amitesh.
Yeah, yeah. So respond to the first question. So I have been making a lot of work on the internet even before the COVID times. And I've been interested in the politics of the internet, in how artists engage with the digital, and of how these intersections take place between the physical and the digital. I mean, I don't think I'm so much interested purely in the physical or the digital, but I'm sort of, I think I'm fascinated by the intersectional points where these different worlds and these different sensibilities and ways of living and making collide. And I think that's a very fertile place. That's a place of, it's very generative. There are a lot of questions that these spaces throw up, and also it's also a meeting place for different kinds of people, for different kinds of collaboration. So I've collaborated with stockbrokers, with coders, programmers, with scientists, with very unlikely experts of the everyday, if I can call them, through the internet. And the internet has not just been a medium, but it's also been a site and a venue, and also, I think, an object of investigation in itself for me. So the last word actually is just a continuation of that developing body of work for me. So I already had a lot of questions that I carried with me into this project. I do believe that internet-based artistic practice does open up access to beyond the physical. And for example, many projects that are part of the SA Virtual are being watched by hundreds of people across the country and abroad, and that is something that I think it takes away the privilege that one needs to access a physical space. And I think we need to start thinking about this as well, because it is quite a privilege to access a physical space. It's quite a privilege to be able to be present where the festival is taking place, and therefore then to be able to watch the work that's being performed there. And I think digital access makes it far more democratic for people to access. And it also opens up, I think, the demographic that might otherwise access your work. So I'm quite happy. I'm very happy, sort of, oscillating between these two spaces to make work. There are different a different set of sort of, I think, reasons why an artist would make work on the internet or in a physical space. I don't think they're opposed for me. I don't think that I would ever say that the internet is a better place to work in than a physical space, or that the physical is better than the digital. Frankly, because I don't believe in these hierarchies. I don't believe that something is better than. I do believe in a kind of horizontality in which all of us can survive and make work and also meet each other at these intersections. And that is what is precisely happening with the last word as well. I also think that through artistic work, many kinds of formations of how the internet has come to be can be challenged and critiqued as well. For example, the like button on social media. Now, all of us have been forced to modify our behavior of relating with each other by the like button. The claim there is to simplify human relationships, right? Either I like this or I dislike it. Now, YouTube carries the dislike button, and I'm waiting for the day when other social media platforms also introduce the dislike button. I do know that introducing the dislike button or not is a major point of debate within social media industry. It is just a button, but they know what this will do. They know the kind of behavior modifications and interrelational dynamic that something so simple like this will cause. And I think it's I mean, look at the word friend. It's been completely colonized by Facebook. You know, so that I often hear people talking to each other. Are we friends on Facebook? I don't even know the meaning of that sentence, the meaning of that question. But certainly language has been modified and colonized by social media platforms and by the way we use the internet. And I think as an artist, I want to intervene there. As an artist, I want to be able to interrupt these patterns of how we relate to each other on the internet, in an unquestioning way, and sort of throw it open and say that, look, we've got choices to make. Um, and the way we perform for each other on the internet is also a way in which these social patterns that have been formed can be interrupted, can be altered, can be changed, etc. So I would say that that's, I think, my primary interest in sort of also making work on the internet. Um, the last poet is, like you rightly say, is a uh, coming together of a diverse set of people. Um, I have been working with a writer, a young writer called Sarah Mariam, who writes for theater. And this is her first project that she's writing for cyber theater. Um, the word cyber theater wasn't even in our vocabulary a year ago. And I think now we're using it more and more. And we can talk about, what this word means. Um, and then Ajaib Ghar joined the collaboration with Ambika and her working partner Nanditi, and they are a lovely organization. They've been designing museums. They've been trying to sort of bring the digital and the physical together in design for some time. And with this project, they have also forayed into live performance on the internet. Many of the performers I'm working with are also working for the internet, performing for the internet for the first time. So we've had to refigure theater training. We've had to refigure what does it mean to perform live on the internet, and also what does it mean to write dramatic texts for the internet. So all of these, I think, are areas that it's been quite a run. The last 5 months have been quite a process.
Um, so I mean, there are some things that you just said that I think I'd like to pick up on, and perhaps put them together in one question that we might want to think about. You talk about a kind of democratizing impulse, so to say, that digital practices embody, and I mean, we also know that it's the same sort of impulse that television news media feeds on, right? And of course, we've been talking for a long time about questions of dissemination, and the kind of possibilities of the work reaching out to many more people. But we are also, I mean, I can't help but think in terms of that very acute context in which one functions in the digital space at the moment. This whole idea also of being able to express dislike, being able to express antagonistic ideas is also something that is not, it's not waiting to happen. It's there already, right? I mean, there are all kinds of quite ugly wars being waged over and on social media. So I'd like to touch upon some of these questions, but I think the overarching question that perhaps I put to you and then go over to the others and also have them respond to would be if we, keeping apart the nomenclature, whether we call it digital practices or cyber theater or online theater or pandemic theater, is there a new aesthetic in the making? And what may be some of its modalities? What is it doing? And what are we doing in creating this new aesthetic? So if you'd like to respond to that.
I think it might be too soon for me to respond to that question. I think, yes, my hunch is that there is a new aesthetic. that is in development. And I think as more and more work comes out, we would be able to talk about this question even more. I would like to say that all of us have gone into this entirely unprepared. That our training has not actually prepared us for making this kind of work. Um, and in fact, a lot of our traditional training resists um, these sort of leaps into the digital medium, to the extent of saying that this might not even be theater. Um, and so there is a sort of the proposition is that there's a radical shift in what is this kind of work that is now emerging. Um, um, and I think what I would like to sort of, what I would like to share is this sort of endeavor that I have, and I think it's important for us to also remember this, is that um, I think one of the things that the digital medium sort of uh, tries to blur for us is the difference between the live and the recorded, right? Because essentially, I think this is really the difference between theater and film, where theater is always live, always happens in the presence of audiences, and there is a real-time connection that the performers and the audiences share. And that is what is not possible in film. Um, I have a sort of feeling that I think the digital is a a meeting point of both. It, I think, digitality breaks theater in the sense that it breaks the co-presence of performers and audiences in the same space. We are not in the same space anymore. And I think digitality breaks film also because the way pre-recorded media can enter cyber theater is not the way recorded mediums would like to enter that space. You know, recorded mediums want to be the hero of their own screenings. So you can only watch a film at one time. You can only listen to, a piece of music at one time. But a different piece of music with a different film, can they coexist? Maybe they can in digital space. If they do in installations, in physical installations, they do. And I think this digital medium then becomes more an installative space than a space in which one can focus only on one thing. I would say that I do think that, having said that, digitality breaks theater and it breaks film. Um, it is it's, I think what is happening is that it's doing its own kind of thing now. It's bringing in all this, the liveness of theater and the power of the recorded. It's sort of bringing these two in, and I think what we're developing now is a third language. I don't know what the third language is, so don't ask me a follow-up question there. But there is certainly a third language. While making the last word, I was constantly having to switch between thinking like a theater director, then thinking like a film director, and then thinking like somebody who understands how the internet works. And it's quite maddening. It's quite maddening to be able to think across these three and to say, all right, can something that is a cumulative of these things, can this be one work? Gesamtkunstwerk, total work, where theater invites everything under the sun to to be a part of the stage. I think still works for cyber theater. Just that I think the ambit has been widened to also include programmers and coders, um, and to think about time and space in a different way. So, but I mean, maybe this at this point it's maybe Ambika can come in from Ajaib Ghar, who's been developing the scenography for The Last Poet, and take us through the journey of how did that take place.
Thank you, Amitesh. Would you prefer Sarah goes first? Because I was hoping to take a few inferences from what she would say. But if you want, I can go ahead and present my screen. Um, so, so just let me know if it's visible to everyone.
It is.
Yeah. So we're talking. I just felt I'll phrase it a bit. This is as much to do with the idea of the last poet, but also to do with computation used in creative fields, where we like to call it computational poetry almost, and give it this kind of a soft effect that typically you don't imagine when you talk about software and you talk about the digital world. And generative also, which will come in as you see the work emerge. And of course, we're talking about it in context of the last poet. We've been very fortunate. Amitesh took a lot of risk taking us on for something which is totally new, and I think he was very clear from the beginning about a few things, where he was talking about a poet who was lost. So we started off with this idea, which we shared with him, of Nishastaga, where there is memory is not yet placed. And we built this huge Miro board, which also has that same kind of a embodiment, and kind of built on those ideas, both visually and in terms of the kind of expressions that we wanted to take forward with it. Um, the idea of both poetic instancing borrows very heavily from the 3D rendering that you see for digital worlds, particularly in gaming, where you're able to use a simple set of rules and change them a little bit and then tweak them into the world. So typically when you see trees or buildings that look similar but are just slightly different. So we've kind of used that same philosophy here. And Praveen, who's our creative tech, also works very heavily with generative art. He calls everything generative everything. So we've used that idea rather than plug in, built environments that I've run in a 3D software and just shove it onto the web. We've actually coded out the spaces that you see within the last poet's web space. This is what we call a sketch. Now I know that people are used to sketches which are done in pencil and pen. This is a sketch done in code, where we were looking at some thoughts of what it would mean to build this kind of an, as you mentioned, an aesthetic, because all references tend to be very Western and Eurocentric. And what would it mean to kind of start building that out with just simple forms that we see from our everyday? Um, and as we went on, Amitesh was thinking about this as maybe as a city or a neighborhood, or almost a world in which the poet was kind of lost and we were looking for him. So we started iterating with this idea. And this is where I reiterate the aspect both of the generative stuff, which is happening. As you see, the boxes are just like generated with a bit of set of rules, and they kind of move around a bit. And also the idea of instancing, where we have to kind of make all of them come together in a certain way. So there are sort of constraints of the technology with which we've now kind of played on. And as we built it, even we found that our iteration started to look a lot more like the cities that we live in. On the left, you see this reddish building, which is, I don't know if I can say this, but I think this is close to Amitesh's residence or part of his residence. And the one on the bottom is an image from Palestine. I think it is Jenin. So we were just looking at these ideas as well, what it means to be within these kind of square rooms or homes, as we all are. And finally, we just to kind of look at it in terms of what it would mean to help the artist move with this idea, and especially Sarah and Amitesh, to kind of conceptualize their writing and their concept around it. We gave some tools to them where they could kind of move it around, change the colors, change the lighting, and then change where they are standing within the space. So to sort of give them a bit of freedom to work with it. And then we'd say, okay, we'll riff off of this, we'll give you something more around that. I haven't added any more images because I just felt I think you should all come for the show, because everything comes together. And finally, I do understand, having a practice of exhibition design and scenography, that on the stage, it may be only the front end, but here we did have to do a lot of work at the back as well. And Amitesh was very clear from the beginning that this is all about live performances, and that aspect needs to really come through to the people coming in. So we have certain elements like interactive modules that the live performers are able to use, that engage the audience, that are not just mere chats where we are just saying "Arey dikh nahi raha hai," and we can't hear, the audio is not working. If you have those kind of problems, we have a help chat where you can really go if you're truly lost, and somebody from the stage end will help you out. And finally, of course, Amitesh was very sort of clear, that also very clear on the fact that it should be accessible to as many people as possible. So there have been like almost like mind-numbing constraints from our end to ensure that they're able to pack in as much as possible, because so that we can see it on a phone, you can see it while you're out on 4G, while you're at home with maybe not such a great internet, all of that. So I'd kind of leave it here, and then perhaps if you have anything to add to this, I'll share more.
Thanks, Ambika. Actually, it's very interesting that you came in before Sarah, because in a way, what you're saying
Together.
that the work of writing took off from what you were doing. So it's almost seeming like.
No, I think Sarah came in before, if I'm not wrong. And in fact, some of her references that she gave of poets and writers who've been kind of imprisoned or lost, and their instances and anecdotes were really helpful for us to kind of build this idea that I initially spoke of in terms of the Nishastaga aspect of it.
Right. And so then, is it that then perhaps this is a good time for you to come in, Sarah? It seems like then there's a sort of back and forth happening between you and Ambika, yourself, and Amitesh, in terms of developing the text. And I understand that this is not text in any conventional sense of the term, but if you'd like to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely, Gargi. Thank you. So to respond to both your question right now and also the question about an aesthetic being developed as we go along in this medium, I think, like Amitesh said, it's too soon to say, because yes, I do feel like there is an aesthetic that's being developed, but because I don't have the answers for how and what, it might be better to kind of just stay with this for now and see where it goes. But yes, there was a lot of back and forth between Ambika and Amitesh and me, which was very new for this project. And I think it came with the medium, because it is for the very first time that I spent such a lot of time with digital scenographers and coders, also in the process, trying really hard to understand how this works. And what's interesting is that I felt like in the beginning of this project, I felt like because it was happening online, there was so much more that was possible to be done, in the sense that it was a problem of plenty. There were so many things that you could possibly do, so many things that you could create. The world could be as big or as small as you liked it to be. That actually became one of the first points at which we had to kind of get together and decide, okay, what are the limits of this world? And once we decide these limits, it's only then that we can start filling it up. So that was one step, because the way it was going with Ambika and Nanditi and Amitesh, we used to meet really often, and we used to often realize that it could really be anything we wanted it to be in that sense. And so how do we proceed from here? So a lot of this happened together for quite a while. Whatever writing happened was also, it would very often go waste, because something from the scenography and the coding and all of that came in, which told us that, okay, this isn't possible, this cannot happen for some reason or the other. And in that sense, the process of writing was quite blind in the beginning, that it wasn't as simple as writing for a stage, because you're familiar with the space. This is a space that we didn't know the end of. We didn't know where all we could go and not go. So that was one. And the second, being more specific to Amitesh's project, to The Last Poet, because of the fact that there was going to be some kind of interaction with the audience, and that interaction came in the form of a leave button. I think a lot of the writing organized itself around this button and what this button meant. So I think while I was writing, I constantly bore it in mind that that this show is going to be designed in a way that the audience can leave at any point. And then do you write differently for them? How do you structure your narrative? How do you tell the story? Do you want to keep them with you all the time? Is there a moment in the text where you want to push them out without them really knowing that you're trying to push them out? Do you make them navigate? Do they navigate on their own? And how all of that affects the way you're writing, the pace of your writing, what you say, where you say it. So that was another thing that was very interesting. And yeah, I think majorly these two things actually. uh, that of course, I mean, even in physical theater, in physical spaces, in real spaces where you are performing on stage, you do write keeping in mind what the space would look like, but there's a sense of familiarity with the space there. But here it was really what Ambika and Nanditi were creating. It was really what they and it's also very difficult to say whether they were creating from what I wrote, or it was the other way around. I feel like Ambika would also agree that it was just sometimes we also felt like, okay, I'm waiting for you to take the next step, or and I would feel the same. And yeah, so in that sense, it was very, very interesting.
Thanks, Sarah. At this time, it may be useful to get the performers in. I mean, in devised performance, there is a huge, I mean, the writing in a way and performing is happening equally, if I may say, by the writers and performers, generally speaking. And so if there was this process of going back and forth of a kind of a dialogic process being initiated between the three of you, where and how did the performers come in, and whether those pulls and pushes are interesting now to reflect back on and see what has been able to be captured, what has sort of slipped out in the process. So anyone from Atul, Ashwat, Deepti, Pallav, Bhagishri. I do have another question for the performers, but if you'd like to step in now to respond to this, and then I can put to you another question I have in mind. So Atul, Ashwat, any of you would like to step in now?
May I?
Sure, please.
It's a fairly new medium for performers in India. It's been a few decades, but I never imagined that I would eventually be performing for this on this medium. A very strange sort of freedom was given to us, and it is still there in performing this kind of piece in our sort of comfortable, safe spaces, our drawing rooms, bedrooms, and imagining that this little camera that is there on top of our laptops is the audience that we are performing to. So there is a very obvious appropriation of an imaginary audience that one is constantly aware of while one is performing. But it is a new medium, and one is also constantly struggling between liveness, live theater, and this thing of cinema. Another very, very strange thing is one is constantly only looking at oneself. There is, I mean, we're not switching off our own projection on the camera, on the screen. So we are, although looking at the camera like this, but we are very aware that, we are looking also at only ourselves. So that is something which, as a performer, I've only seen dancers do, really, when they have these big mirrors and looking at them and performing. In fact, when we go into rooms to rehearse where there are mirrors, we actually cover them because we are encouraged not to look at ourselves. That was a bit disconcerting, but again, as I'm saying, as somebody was mentioning, we're constantly discovering new things as performers and as in performance. Very often we have either used our body and space or audience interaction literally, or spoken a lot of text. For the first time, I'm also enjoying and realizing that audience, people who are watching, are enjoying just moments of stasis, moments of silences where nothing happens. and the frame itself that you're looking at has its own dynamic quality and has its own language, which me as a performer, I'm constantly discovering. I find myself not really doing cinema acting, neither am I really performing like I do on live stage. Um, we're discovering new nuances every day. Yeah, that's what my position is right now in this piece. When the text and directions were given to us, this is where I found myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Atul. Would Deepti, Ashwat, Pallav, Bhagishri, would any of you like to respond to this?
Hi, Gargi. Hi, everyone. Am I audible? Is it clear? Can you hear me? Sorry.
We can hear you.
Okay, yeah. I think I have same feelings on whatever Atul has said. It's same. We are going through the same journey. But adding on to it is that, the biggest struggle is that when you are in theater, of course, you are in rehearsal space, you have people around you. Or when you're doing film, even then you have people around you. You're on a set, the people around you, or even though you're doing camera work. But here in this, you're in isolation, you're in dark. Like I'm sitting, like my team have named my room as Killa. So I'm sitting in my Killa and alone. It's like you're just with your own self, even though of course you interact with the director and you come to the rehearsals, but at some point you are totally isolated. And in this pandemic, we all felt isolated. You were left on your own in a certain space, and that reflects in this work as well. You feel that isolation, and of course, I never had imagined myself also that I'll be doing this kind of work. And I've always said to people, I don't know, because in a lot of webinars you come and you talk about these theater, is this theater or not? So I would not like to go into those debates at this stage. But yes, this process has been very fulfilling and very scary for me personally. I've been very, very scared to venture into this when Amitesh called me and kindly said, you have to do it. And I said, no, I have got other commitments. In a way, of course, I had commitments, but I was also trying to run away from it, to be honest. I'll be very honest. So I said, okay, give me some time and I'll think about it. I'll try to talk to other, and of course you have to leave something, and it's your choice what you want to do. So this process, but what has been very nice and very fulfilling for me till now has been to come to is the acceptance of my own self in many ways in this space, when you're on your own. So that is very fulfilling in certain ways as a performer, because I know I've heard of Maya, like Maya Rao. I've discussed Maya many times, a couple of times, and I know she records herself and sees her work. A lot of people do it. Of course, we talked about dancers, but as performers, I only know about her. She used to record. So I used to wonder how she's looking at her, creating her own pieces, on her own space. Of course, she has collaborators many times, she told me. But likewise, this is a totally new process, and it has been, it's a very roller coaster journey. Some days you feel very, very, happy, and someday you're very sad after doing the streaming. You feel extremely sad, and there's nobody else to share your feelings with. You're left on your own in the room, and you're sitting there and looking at your text, looking at your own space. What's going on with me right now? So it plays on your head. And one more thing, last thing I would say, I will let other people speak, is that the leave button is funny, that the leave button which is there, and when you see those people coming in, and if somebody leaves, it really feels, at the beginning, it felt like somebody is walking out on my performance. It just felt like that somebody is just I could see some when the first time we did it. And of course, they were looking at the interface and how it's working. So I literally felt like I'm performing on stage and people are walking out. It felt like people are walking out, and I feel like, stop, don't go. So it was that feeling which was there, and I've settled now. I'm okay with people coming and going now, but it was very scary, to be honest.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's almost it's a new space. It's, as many of you are saying, not the real space, but also constantly the references to the real, to the auditorium, to the stage. Deepti, would you like to say something?
Well, like Atul and Ashwath said, it's such a new space that I have a really small thing to add into this. I've really started feeling as if I'm doing my first play ever. And that kind of a nervousness and the fact that you just don't know what's going to happen and what the reaction is going to be, if it's going to resonate with people. Also because we are not meeting collectively in real space. Also just doesn't let us sometimes have these extra discussions post rehearsals of how we are feeling sometimes. But I think it's kind of a boon as well, because if it hadn't been on this platform, we wouldn't have I wouldn't have got this opportunity to be working with people who are sitting in different cities altogether. So I don't know how to speak right now because I'm always this nervous about this project, and just I've started developing a new relationship with the camera, because that's how rehearsal is on my end. That you just sit in front of the camera and just keep staring at it and see how you look, and is it giving something more than just being there? So it's altogether new discovery for everybody.
Yeah. There is something quite interesting in what you are saying with regard to the camera, which also I suppose Atul was saying. Um, this sort of double intimacy that the camera seems to. It's a completely unforgiving creature, right? I mean, there's nothing that you can do that it will miss, right? So in that sense, it's scary. But I know that this might seem like an imposition. But I urge us to return to the question that's been playing on my mind. And I'm happy for you to, Amitesh, duck the question, rephrase it, and let the answers hang in the air. But if we can come back to the question of what may be emerging. And I think these are two questions kind of interrelated and tied to each other. What may be emerging in the present? I'm talking not strictly in terms of an aesthetic, but also in terms of the role or the work or the function of performance. Looking at the context that you narrated right at the beginning, Amitesh, which is the context of a pandemic, which is also the context of a state that many of us are, I mean, it's unfamiliar and yet increasingly more familiar. And so in that context, what do we think is the function of performance? Really, the question also has been, why performance? Why theater? Why are we doing what we are doing when so many people are dying, when there are protests, when, so I mean, I'm wanting to be provocative. And so over to any of you, but Amitesh, if you want to respond to that.
I think for me, the answer of why performance was very simple, and that was because I wanted to collate, collect, reflect upon, and then also narrativize the ways in which authoritarian regimes are afraid of the written word, and how poets and writers and also activists are the new targets, and they're the new targets around the world. And I think, I think it's my artistic duty to also be able to hold these stories together, to ask what happens when a people's poet is threatened, and is what happens when a book is burned, what happens when somebody has to live in exile for what they wrote, for the poem that they penned, and to look at the lives around them, which get affected by this, their families, their neighborhoods, people who are moved by their work, are people who remember them by their work, people who hold on to their collections, to the poems, and to the writings, and how those writings and poems are transformative for many of us, who read them, who hold them close, who keep going back to them in moments of crisis and chaos. so for me, performance was the way to actually capture this political moment, and to look at the layered narratives that are involved in this situation. Uh, I think also that in terms of why performance for this medium, um, for me it's also, I think, a conflict between the image and the flattening of the bodies. You know, that every image uh, threatens the body in the sense that it flattens it. It flattens it into a two-dimensional um, object, a figure, and and the circulation of such imagery across the internet and on our digital worlds uh, sometimes does far more damage to lives and to people whose images are carried. So this project for me was also a way to explore the depth of bodies in front of the camera, so that so that the performing body keeps militating against the 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 flattening aspect of the camera, that it's not an image that we're dealing with. It is not just a two-dimensional figure. This is real, and this is live, and this is happening right now, and it's only happening in a proximity that performance allows for. What is very interesting with the last poet is that when you as an audience member watch the performer, it almost it sort of um, gives you the illusion that the performer is only talking to you, because there is a kind of an upfront camera facing um, sort of eyes of the performer looking at you, and so there is immediately a construction of intimacy, a construction of proximity, that it's almost as if I've entered your space, and where you are, or the performer is in my space. And I think that that immediate proximity is very essential to expressing the layered, nuanced text that Sarah has written, because otherwise it's impossible to, you know, you know, when people gather physically in a theater hall, and there are 100 or 200 people sitting and watching a play. What happens there often is also the loss of individuality of the audience member. So that when 50 people laugh, the other 25 are also forced to laugh along with them. And there is a kind of there is this sort of collective body that also becomes overbearing for that one person who's sitting in the audience who doesn't want to laugh. I remember sort of a theater critic who paraphrased Bertolt Brecht saying that a critic is somebody in sitting in the theater is somebody who cries when the audiences laughs, and who laughs when the audiences cries. And this kind of this sort of uh, interrelationality between the performer and the person who's sitting and watching is far more intense, I think, and far more direct in this digital space, I think. And that is something that I've been enjoying quite a lot.
Yeah, thanks, Amitesh. I think we've completely run out of time, but I'm also very glad that we got to hear from almost everyone here. And let's hope this is only the beginning of a conversation that will continue um, uh, upon watching and after watching the show. We really look forward to the premiere on 18th. And good luck to all of you. Um, I have no other questions.
Thank you, Gargi. This has been delightful. Thank you for coming and having this conversation with us. If I don't know if there are any questions from people who've been listening to us, if that is something that we could quickly take right now, or
I don't see any question here. Of course, there are some comments quite, but those I don't think can be addressed here.
okay.
So
All right.
I don't see any questions from anyone. In that case, I think we can conclude. I would like to thank everyone on behalf of Serendipity Arts Festival for the wonderful panel. And I'd like to thank everyone who has joined us as well. The Last Poet will have 4 shows in December, and the first is premiering on December 18th. So please do register. All information is available on our website. Take care and stay safe. Thank you.